Good Hart, Michigan. 1968, there is a stretch of road called the Tunnel of Trees where the branches are so thick they block out the sun even at noon. At the end of a long gravel drive sits a cabin called Blisswood. It was built for summer laughter and lake views, but as July begins, the cabin has stopped making noise. The family car sits in the drive, the tires slowly being swallowed by the rising grass. The mail is forced into the box until it spills onto the dirt, yellowing under a sun that no one inside is watching. Not a single window is cracked open against the sweltering heat. From the road, it looks like a family is sleeping in. From the porch, it feels like the world has ended. Let's go deep into the well. Privacy is a religion in northern Michigan. You don't ask why your neighbor hasn't mowed the lawn or why their lights stay on at 3 in the morning. But by the second week of July, the silence at Blisswood has become loud. The family's boat, still tied to the dock, bobs against the wood, but the vinyl seats are coated in a thick layer of untouched dust. There are no splashes from the water, no screen doors slamming, no dogs barking. Just the Ford station wagon, parked with a strange finality as if it knows it's never going to move again. The locals start to look toward the tree lean with a sense of unease. They tell themselves the Robisons went on a spontaneous trip to the city, but they can't explain why the keys are still in the ignition of the car. The summer is moving forward, but Blisswood is stuck in June, a frozen snapshot of a vacation that suddenly stopped breathing. 27 days. That is how long the secret sat in the humidity. By the time a neighbor finally gathers the courage to step onto the porch, the air around the cabin has changed. It's no longer the scent of pine and lake water, it's a heavy, cloying sweetness that sticks to the back of the throat. He reaches out to knock, but his hand stops inches from the wood. Behind the glass of the front window, a living curtain of black flies is vibrating. Thousands of them, trapped between the curtains and the pane, creating a low, mechanical hum that sounds like a failing machine. The neighbor peers through a tiny gap in the drapes. Inside, the house is sweltering, the thermostat seemingly pushed to its limit. He sees a half-empty glass of water on the table, the surface covered in a thick film of dust. The silence coming from the other side of that door isn't empty, it's full of something that has been festering in the dark for 4 weeks. When the lock is finally forced, there is no chaos of a robbery. It is a scene that has been meticulously preserved. A book lies open on a side table, its pages curled from the moisture. A deck of cards is spread out for a game that never finished. It looks like a single second of time was grabbed and stretched until it broke. The father is still in his chair, facing the window. The children are in the back rooms. But as the flashlights cut through the toxic fog of the interior, the horror shifts from the what to the who. Someone stayed in this house after the clock stopped. Someone walked through these rooms while the heat climbed, adjusting the curtains to make sure no one could see in. Someone walked past the half-filled water glasses and the children's toys, making sure every exit was locked from the inside. To find the shadow that stood in that room, you have to go back to the city of Detroit. Richard Robison was a man who built his life on the power of the image. His advertising firm was successful, wealthy, and respected. But behind the glossy presentations, a predator was eating the company from the inside. His partner, Joseph Scolaro, had spent months weaving a web of forged signatures and shell accounts. In the weeks before the trip to Good Hart, Richard had finally noticed the missing thousands. He had demanded an audit, a full accounting of every cent. Scolaro knew that when that audit began, his life as a wealthy executive was over. The trip to the cabin wasn't just a vacation for Richard, it was the final moment of peace before he planned to fire his partner and call the authorities. But Scolaro was already one step ahead. The execution was handled with a terrifying level of technical precision. The killer didn't just walk in with a weapon, he used 2 different calibers. A .22 caliber rifle was used for the initial shots through the rear window, picking off the targets while they were still relaxed in their chairs. Then, a .25 caliber automatic pistol was used to finish the job at close range. This was a calculated decision to ensure that not a single witness survived to tell the story. The choice of 2 weapons was a distraction, a way to make investigators think there were multiple shooters or a professional hit squad. But the truth was simpler. It was one man, driven by the absolute necessity of total silence. After the shooting stopped, the killer didn't run into the woods. He stayed. The police files describe a scene that is psychologically disturbing. The bodies were moved. They were arranged in a pile in the center of the living room, and then a large blanket was carefully draped over them, tucked in at the edges as if they were being put to sleep. In criminal profiling, this is often seen as a sign of deep personal connection, a killer who cannot bear to look at the faces of the people he has destroyed. He stayed in that sweltering house, listening to the lake hitting the shore, while he systematically wiped down surfaces and pulled every curtain shut. He transformed a murder scene into a hidden tomb, ensuring that the summer sun would do the work of destroying the forensic evidence before anyone thought to look inside. In a house filled with 27 days of decay, the killer only made one major mistake. Near the edge of the living room rug, pressed into a dark stain, was a single footprint. It didn't belong to a heavy work boot or a local hunter. It was the print of a Hush Puppies loafer, the soft-soled, casual shoe of a middle-class businessman. It was a print that belonged in a country club or a boardroom, not on the floor of a massacre. It changed the entire direction of the mystery. This wasn't a monster from the forest, it was a monster in a suit. Someone who had probably had dinner with these people. Someone who knew which chair Richard sat in and knew the names of all 4 children. That footprint was the only human thing left in the cabin, a mark of a friend who had stepped over the bodies to make sure his secret was safe. As the investigation stalled, detectives turned their eyes toward Joseph Scolaro's private property. They couldn't find the murder weapons. Scolaro claimed they had been stolen from his car, but they found something else. On his land sat an old tree stump that Scolaro used for target practice. Detectives spent hours digging spent lead out of the rotting wood. When they put those bullets under a microscope, the mystery finally began to bleed. The unique rifling marks, the fingerprints of a gun barrel, matched the bullets pulled from the walls of the Blisswood cabin. It was the link they needed. Scolaro's own practice rounds were the ghosts that followed him back to the city. But the law was slow, and Scolaro was a man who knew how to use the silence of the woods to his advantage. For the next 60 months, Joseph Scolaro lived as a free man. He took over the Robison firm. He walked the streets of Detroit, attended social events, and even spoke about how much he missed his late partner. He was a man living in a ghost story of his own making. But every time a phone rang or a car slowed down in front of his house, the pressure must have been astronomical. The police were playing a long game, waiting for a piece of testimony or a final ballistics report to lock the cage. Scolaro was a predator who had successfully blended back into the herd, but he was always looking over his shoulder, waiting for the moment the 27 days of silence from Good Hart would finally find its voice. In 1973, the law finally knocked on the door. They didn't need the murder weapons anymore, they had the footprint, the ballistics from the tree, and the records of the money he had stolen. The circle was closed. But Scolaro had one last move. As the police cars pulled into his driveway, he chose a permanent silence. He left a note that was just one last lie, claiming he was innocent while the evidence proved he was a ghost. Blisswood was eventually razed to the ground, and the forest reclaimed the lot. But the air in Good Hart still feels heavy. The 27 days of silence didn't end with the discovery of the bodies, they just expanded to cover the whole town. The family is gone, the killer is gone, and the only thing left is the sound of the lake hitting the shore, over and over, like a heart that refuses to stop beating. The Robison family went to the tunnel of trees for a vacation they never finished. They were betrayed by a man who valued a ledger more than a human life, and the secret they held for 27 days still hangs in the Michigan air. If you ever find yourself on M119, past the old Blisswood lot, don't stop the car. Some silences are meant to stay buried in the dirt. Thanks for walking through the archive with me today. I'll see you at the bottom of the well.